right? They'll end up dropping you off in a pigsty when they're done playing with you, right? But he was living it up. He thought everything was fine. I have my money. I'm freed from my father's house and control. And look what, then he wakes up and he says, well, I have to go back to my father. I have to return to the place that I came from, right? Because where I am now, this is not where, I'm in exile here, right? This is not my home. Can't love anything in this world like I can love God. The other thing that he was big on was this idea of the struggle with God. And for him, the paradigm for that was Jacob's wrestling with the angel. He thought that should be everybody's experience, that your relationship with God is not easy. We all have difficulties there and challenges and problems. It is this struggle in a sense, right? And he says the struggle is a paradoxical kind of a struggle, because if I God, that means I really lose. This is a fight that for me to win, I have to lose. If I don't surrender, it's okay, you win. I don't really lose. That's when I win, right? So it was a fight you had to lose in that sense. Another thing number 4, another sort of idea that he emphasized all the time was something like intimacy with God. I mean, he was someone who just seemed as if God were his best friend. He would say things, just God and you should just be like two old friends. And you're catching up with one another after a while, and it's just me and God, arm in arm, walking together and just talking like old friends. And he had this extraordinary sense of intimacy and closeness and natural kind of spontaneous sort of, right? And it's infectious when you hear somebody talk this way. It's like, oh, I can have a relationship like that with God? I didn't know that, right? And he would talk like this all the time. And there's an example. I use this all the time with my students because it's just so good. He was trying to explain to the monks what prayer is like. Right? Why does one pray and all of that? He said, how can I explain it to you? I might have used this the last time I was here because I use it all the time, but here we go again. How can I explain it to you? Look, think about it this way. Let's say that I walk into a big room, a big hall that's crowded with people. There might be a couple hundred people in there. And in that crowd, there's one person that I love. Just one. Where do you think I'm going to go? I'm going to make a beeline for that person. In fact, I'm already with that person. My heart has already rushed ahead of me to be with the person that I love. It might take me a minute to get there. Hi, how are you? And oh, hello, nice to see you tonight. But in my mind, I know where I'm going. Right? He goes, that's what prayer is. You go to your icons to say your prayers because you want to be where love is. You want to be in the place of love. You love God, and that's why you pray, for no other reason. People talk about like, oh, you have a prayer rule. That's like, would you have like a love rule? Oh, time to love my wife at 8 o'clock, or I don't know, Granted, we need to be disciplined. I mean, there's a logic to that, but that can be taken too far too, right? And he cultivated a very sort of family atmosphere at the monastery too because of this kind of thing. Oh, I should say this too. I mean, the love of God, I mean, that's something that we need to know, I mean, what that is and how that works. I mean, our love for God. If you read St. Basil's longer rules, which are his rules for organizing Christian communities, how do we live together in such a way that our common life can not only follow the teachings of the gospel, but embody the gospel. How can we live together in such a way that we live a sort of evangelical life in the sense of the gospel? And that's what those rules are about. And it's written in the form of questions and answers. And the first question that's put to St. Basil is, well, if we're here to talk about the rules, what's the first rule? Is there one rule that's more important than the others? Is there one that we should take care of first? Since we're here to talk about rules. He says, oh yeah, he goes, there is. He goes, that's an old question, he said. That's a very old question, he said. It's the same one that the lawyer asked Jesus in the gospel. What is the greatest commandment? And the answer, all the answers he gives, by the way, are all from the New Testament. What's the answer? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and your neighbor as yourself. That's it. That's the first rule. And in a sense, it's the only rule in a way. That's the first thing you always got to do and always got to think about. Then the second question is, all right, that makes sense. We get that. But can love be taught? Can this love of God, is it something that can be taught? Which is like the old Socratic question, can virtue be taught? Can you teach someone to be virtuous? Plato wasn't too sure about that one. I'm not so sure either. I mean, right? It's not easy to teach people to be virtuous. I don't know if it can be taught. And so the question is to St. Basil, can this love be taught? And he says, no, absolutely not. You don't need to be taught this because you have the love of God implanted within you, embedded within you. It's part of what it means to be human, is that you have this built-in natural desire and love for God. He says, nobody taught you to love your parents. Nobody taught you to love the sunlight. Nobody taught you to love the fresh air. There are certain things that you naturally love and like, and one of those things is God. So what you have to do is connect with, rediscover that part of yourself, or that depth within yourself that actually does love God. There are parts of us that don't like God. You don't want to be connecting with those parts, right? But there is always a core of sanctity, a core of holiness. It's the presence of God within us. It's the gift of the Holy Spirit that was given to us at baptism, which works together with our own natural desire for God. And again, that's why the elder can talk about the example of walking into the room. There's someone you love, you go to them. It's the same way with God, right? Unfortunately, most of us are so damaged or so beaten down by life and afraid to love, afraid to make ourselves vulnerable that we put up masks. And, it's not easy. From the time you're small, I mean, the whole world tells you just to do the opposite, And I think they say it was bad enough that, I don't know, your mother abandoned you or that your father didn't love you, or all of those things are bad enough. But even worse was the fact that because of those things, we became disconnected from something deeper within ourselves, right? And that was that connection, that natural connection to God that we have. Another, you can tell me when I should stop because I don't want to go over the number 5. The intense consciousness of God's presence. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but how many minutes out of the day do we think about God? What are our thoughts rushing towards? The new episode of your favorite show of the week on Netflix, or what do we think about? What occupies our minds? We don't think about God that much, I don't think. We think about eating, we think about all kinds of things, but right? The elder wasn't like that. He was someone who just had this constant, intense awareness of God's presence. And it was a very powerful, thing. And he tells another story about this, like an example. And he says, let's say that I'm walking down the road and I'm on my way to visit a friend. Did I tell this story the last time too? No. And I'm thinking about how nice it'll be when I get to my friend's house. Maybe we'll watch like a sports on TV or something, and I'll have a beer and some popcorn, and it'll be a great afternoon, and maybe I'm whistling a happy tune, and I can't wait to get to the place I'm going to, and all of a sudden I look up, and there's a lion on the road, on the path, coming in my direction. He goes, at that moment, What am I thinking about? Am I thinking about the football game or the beer I'm going to have? Not anymore. All that stuff is gone. He goes, and what would happen, what would I be thinking about if that lion started to walk toward me? Would I have any other thought in my mind than the fact that there's a lion walking toward me? What could I possibly be thinking about other than that? He goes, and what would I be thinking about if it came right up to me and pressed its face next to mine? Would I be thinking about anything else? Could I even think about anything else? And then he ends it all. He says, and what would happen if that lion swallowed me whole, he says. This idea of being completely absorbed into God somehow. And I think that's what the presence of God was to this man. It was just this power, this force, this presence that was there that was so palpable to him and so powerful that, right? Nothing could distract you from that. Of course, the monastic ideal is to live your life in such a way that the remembrance of God is continual. St. Basil again says that the recollection of God is the indwelling of God. Imagine that. We say the Jesus prayer, to call God to mind is not just to conjure up a thought. It's to allow the presence of God into your consciousness. So he says, the recollection of God is already the indwelling of God. Right? And the idea is to sort of live with that consciousness. And I think I was reading some letters. He was just canonized, 24 hours ago. When was it? Elder Sophrony has a series of letters to David Balfour. And at one point, David Balfour is writing to him and telling him about the troubles that he's having and these terrible afflictions and trials that he's undergoing. And the elder says, well, God is allowing these things to happen to you so that you can arrive at a place where you will have the continual remembrance of God, that you will think about God. God is letting this happen so that you will hold the thought of him in your mind always. Right? So the lion. Another thing too, you go to some monasteries and people look very glum. They look kind of downcast, or they're not very friendly. They have their heads down and things like this. He did not like that at all. He hated that. He hated that. For him, it was all the monk, like the Christian, had to be someone who was filled with joy. Right? He had this idea of ilarotis tu prosopu, this brightness of countenance, that the face had to be bright, right? Because if the Christ was there, that should be obvious without you saying anything. You have to be joyful. And that was also because he had this tremendous optimism about human potential. Very optimistic. Not to be passive, but to be courageous. Not to be, somebody who sits back, but to be a man of action in the right way. And this joy is not some human elation or some human experience, but it's really found again in surrendering to Christ. I'll tell you a funny story from the monastery of Vilchiariu, which is also on Mount Athos. A pilgrim went there once and walked into the courtyard of the monastery and saw a monk there and asked for the monk's blessing. And the monk said something that scandalized him. He was shocked, horrified. So he went and made his way to the abbot and said, oh, abbot, I just came in here and I asked this monk for a blessing, and he said something that, my ears are still burning. And the abbot starts laughing. And the pilgrim's like, what kind of a monastery is this? He says, the abbot says, that guy? He goes, don't worry about him. Because that guy came to the monastery and he wanted to walk around all day with his head down, mumbling the Jesus prayer under his breath. And he just succeeded in annoying everybody, right? And so I called him over one time and I said, hey, you, come here. He goes, you want to say something? You want to walk around and say something? You say to everybody you see or who sees you, say, please forgive me, I'm a fornicator. And the amazing thing is that he did it. Instead of walking around like, stop that. Walk around in public and with your long face and your 50-foot prayer rope and not even saying hello to the people who walk into the monastery. He says, no, you're not going to do that here. If you want something to say this. I think the greatest part of the story is the fact that he actually did it. I mean, that shows real humility. Openness to visitors, including non-Orthodox visitors, was another characteristic trait of the elder, because there are some, fortunately very few, monasteries that not only don't allow visitors to sit at the same tables as the monks in the refectory. They have like a table for non-Orthodox, but they won't allow them into the church. I mean, maybe in the more liberal monasteries, you'll be allowed to go into the narthex. But, and there are reasons for that. I'm not saying it's completely insane. But his thinking was, these people have come from very far away, and something brought them here. Nobody's a tourist on Mount Athos. Everyone who's here, the belief is, has been brought here by the Mother of God, because that's her place. That's the garden of the Mother of God. So whether they know it, whether they realize it or not, that God has brought them to this place, and we have a responsibility to them. Of course, they couldn't receive communion if they weren't Orthodox. You wouldn't even give them andidron, which we do in this country because it's a little bit different, the way we do things here. But he was very much open to, like I said, so these people are guests in our home, and they are potential members of our family. That's how he looked at them. And lots of people indeed converted. Is there still time? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, that might be good. There's always more to say, but it might be a time to open up the floor to questions.
You definitely gave us a good meal tonight, Father, with all your words. And Elder Athos, I'm sure will be recognizing the same. Are there any questions? So for me, when he had that experience of the Lord and the light, it almost, and the reaction, it reminds me a lot of St. Simeon, the new theologian, because it was that same kind of boldness and the same way that he would speak. And he would, in many ways, almost shock the people of his own time, because he spoke with such boldness about his own personal experience, but also with what he felt that true Christians would be. I mean,
yeah, I can see the parallel. The difference, though, is that Simeon is someone who, after those very powerful experiences of grace, felt abandoned by God. That's part of the whole kind of process for him, like Silouan of Athos, too. That God comes and embraces them, and they feel God, then God vanishes. And they're left feeling wounded and pining for the presence of God. He never seems to have had that problem. He was always on this kind of steady, which is why people want, why he got sick and left the scene so early. And the way I answer that question is that, it says in the Bible, no one can see God and live. And I think he was just on fire with God, that he just be burnt out fairly early. Because he really was someone who just, But I mean, I don't know. He doesn't really talk about experiences of divine abandonment in the same way that Saint Simeon did. So, but the other part that you say is correct. So, questions? No dessert. There has to be one question, and then you get a dessert.
So they welcome visitors, non-Athos, even women folk?
No, not women. No. It used to be the case years ago that no women ever went to any men's monastery, and no men ever went to any women's monastery. That's just the way it was. And even in lots of churches today, people self-segregate. Men sit on one side and women sit on the other side. And that's a little, that goes against our modern sensibilities, but there are benefits to that sort of thing, you know. I was asked this question by one of the people on the 60 Minutes team, who went, why don't you have women here? I said, excuse me, I said, if there were women here, do you think you'd be sitting here talking to me right now? I mean, right? So I think, you know, when men and women are together, there's a certain sort of dynamic that prevails. Men become very self-conscious around women, and there's always this kind of, you know, thing that happens. And I think when the sexes are separated or segregated, a whole layer of, or level of sort of, is just removed from that experience, and the men are free to, you know, because if men are going to be with women, they're not going to be too interested in the religion. They're going to be interested in the women. And a lot of women, they don't want to be bothered by men either. When I first moved back to Boston, before I became a monk. I went back to Boston after my doctoral work. I wanted to join a gym to stay in shape. And I opened up the yellow pages. And I was happy to see that there were at least 8 gyms in the Brookline area. And you want to know what? They were all women-only gyms. So I'm like, why is that allowed? God help you if you have a men's-only kind of a place. It's a Boys Scouts or a football team or cigar smoking, whatever. All of that is considered to be what? I mean, just some horrible, obscene sort of crime that men are perpetrating. I go, okay, have it your way. Then you find out that women have women, I don't know, do they have them out here? There are a lot of them in Boston. So, you know, I get that. Women want to go and do their thing. They don't want to be ogled or bothered or dress up, or I get it. So, you know, I mean, I can't, if, you know, I mean, there's a certain mentality that either will never accept the idea that, you know, women can't go, but it's always been that way there for well over 1,000 years, and it's the way it continues to be, so. And by the way, that's one of the most common questions that I get asked when I do a Mount Athos talk. Any questions? Why are no women allowed? You know, so. Yeah.
Another common question. What advice would you give to someone who would like to go, or how would he prepare himself to go to?
You mean personally, kind of? Well, I think, you know, if you're living an Orthodox Christian life, I mean, if you're a member in good standing, so to speak, in your community, if you're adhering to the life in Christ, there's not a whole lot. You don't need to undertake anything special. The pilgrimage is the thing that you do that's special. Right? I mean, the work that's involved and the travel that's involved and the difficulty in traveling that distance, and that's an exercise in itself. That's a kind of a sacrifice that you make. Look, it's easier now than it ever was to visit Mount Athos, but it's still not that easy. It's a long way away and all of that. But I think that the journey is part of it, right? And when you get to the Holy Mountain, I mean, it kind of takes over, right? You don't really need to. I think the more I encourage people, I say, make your plans, because that's what's responsible. On Monday we're going to go to Vatopedi. On Tuesday we're going to go to Iviro. Okay, do that, because that's what responsible people do. I recently helped a group of American friends. They're hyper organized. We have to know every minute. Well, I said, okay, well, do that, but when you go, be prepared for everything to change. Be prepared for all the plans to fall apart, and don't worry about it. Just go with the flow. So you go there, and something else takes over. You might get off the boat, and you were going to go in that direction, and then the people on the boat said, no, there's a vigil at this monastery tonight. You should go. Everyone's going to be there. So let's go there. So there has to be a kind of, you know, openness, a spontaneity. Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, if you don't know anything about Mount Athos, it might help to read a couple of things just to be a little more informed about, but I think the journey is part of it. I think that's the preparation, right? And the will to go, the desire to go, that's important too. I remember I spent a long time in Jerusalem once, and it dawned on me while I was there that people think when they go on a pilgrimage, let's go to Jerusalem or let's go to the monastery. It's natural to think that when I get there, I'm going to find something in that place, or I'll discover something in that place, or I'll learn something about myself, I'll get some sort of blessing, something's going to happen to me. And I mean, that does happen, that can happen. But to me, the biggest blessing was what? Was extracting myself from the place I had always lived in, and removing myself from the routine that I had, like all of us have, and putting myself into a very different kind of a place, and now being able to look back on my life in the world, having stepped outside of it for a minute, and all of a sudden you could see all of these things that seem so obvious but you were blind to in the world. It's like, oh yeah, my relationship with that one person is not very good, it's not very healthy, that's bad, I see how bad that is now, right? Or I could do more of this, or why am I not doing that, and look at the rut I'm in, or whatever it is. Sometimes you're just too close to it, you can't see it. I used to be a painter years ago. And when you're painting, you can only be as far away from the canvas as the length of your arm and the paintbrush, which is sometimes pretty close. It's a big canvas. And every once in a while, what does the painter have to do? He has to stop, put his brushes down, and take a step back so you can have that bigger perspective. I think that's what pilgrimage is in a way. Of course, you go there and it's fantastic, and it's a blessing, and all that is wonderful. But it's also, the blessing works the other way too. It's gaining an insight into the person you were and are in the world, because now you finally have a little bit of time and space and the right frame of mind to actually see it. So,
what do you do with that seed that is planted in you there?
That's a really good question. I mean, part of me wants to say it doesn't matter, because whatever we try to do, we're going to mess it up anyway, right? So I think the gift of God is not given to us to somehow manipulate and manage and orchestrate and all of that. I think it's more about surrendering, right? It's about something comes, something is given to you, and really all you could do is welcome it, right? And let it be what it is, and try and, again, sort of surrender yourself to it as best you can, and let it, because the minute I get involved, well, that's the worst thing ever, so. No, I'm serious. One thing Elder Milano said once too, he said, it's coming to the monks. Because all of you come to the monastery thinking that the monastery has something to give you. I tell you, that's completely wrong. We have nothing to give you here. Nothing. If you come here thinking that we have something to give you, you're going to be bitterly disappointed. We have nothing to give you. And that's the good news. You want to know why? Because you already have everything you need. God has already given you everything you need. You just have to learn to cultivate that within yourself, or to let it be what it is, right? So, that expression about trying to think outside the box, well, thinking is the box, right? Isn't it? So, it's not about what do I do with my mind? It's about a whole other, acquiring a different kind of mind, not just applying the same kind of thinking to something else, right? That's the dilemma. I mean, if the ego is the thing that's broken and confused and deformed or whatever, how can that, what can I do to make myself better? And say, well, you're the problem, actually. How are you going to fix it, right? I heard a sermon once, and it was about the Good Samaritan, and there was a bishop, and he said, look, you're not the Good Samaritan. Get that idea out of your head. You're not the Good Samaritan. You're the guy in the ditch, right? So, because you're taught to think that you're the Good Samaritan, right? But it's like, no, you're the guy in the ditch. So, that's exactly right. Yeah. One more question, maybe, or. Yes.
When you were telling the story that he mentioned in regards to walking to a friend's house and you're thinking about the beer you're going to have this course, you're going to watch them and the line being there. Right?
I added the beer, by the way, so that was it.
Well, currently I'm reading On the Incarnation, St. Athanasius, and it really reminded me of the way he talks about the condition before the fall, where our thoughts were constantly contemplating, God and the Word, and then once, after the fall, once the temptation came, we turned towards our bodies, and it just really made me think of that. I'm wondering if you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's this idea that, in a state of grace, let's say, which, whether it's in paradise or whether it's here, the world becomes transparent. Right? That, in other words, God is present everywhere, right? So how come we don't see him or feel him in some way? Right? Why does the world seem so opaque in a way when God is actually informing everything and present in everything? And I think what happens is that, grace renders the opaque surface of creation transparent again. And you can look at the world, you can look at nature, you can look at other people, not as objects to be exploited for your own gratification, but you see the depth within them now. You go from seeing things only very superficially, right, being fixated on surfaces. And we live in a culture which is all very much about surfaces, right? And they're fascinating, aren't they? The glitter and the glam and it's just so distracting, right? Very, very superficial though. And we don't see the depth. And that's what, the gift of the Spirit allows. There are different ways to talk about it. You're purified, and now you can see more clearly. It's not as if just the surface of the world that's been cleaned, but it's also myself now that has been purified. And now I see things differently because of that. And the same thing, they apply the same idea to Scripture, that a person who lacks grace, let's say, cannot see past the surface of Scripture. And St. Paul says there's the letter and there's the Spirit. And a certain kind of mind just can't see past it. Oh, the Bible, they'll quote something and look how ridiculous, and how do you believe that? And because they're looking at it very superficially. It's like you don't see, you haven't tasted, you haven't experienced the depth that's there because you're stuck on surfaces. So, and I think it's a human problem to fall into that trap. Excuse me. But it's aided and abetted by society, because we live in a society that's very superficial. And all of our cultural entertainment and so forth, it's all very, skin deep in a sense. So, and everything's fake, by the way. Right? Men who aren't men and women who aren't women pretending to be men and women, and everything is all, right? As if a little bit of cosmetic surgery or some hormone treatments could, right, make one thing into another. That's pretty superficial, isn't it? Anyway. I also think too that, maybe we don't want to see the depth that's there because, we'd have to change, right? If I could see that other people were not just, friends or enemies or people that could help me or people that could hurt me, but that each one of them was precious in the eyes of God. Each one of them was unique, and no other life like theirs will ever appear in this world. And, then it becomes that much. Now I have a responsibility to those people. And maybe I don't want that. It was the old way was better. Where I could just, manipulate things and take what I wanted and be selfish and that sort of thing. So, okay.
Any other questions?
Just a comment. I guess that, seeing and understanding the depth of what the other person makes you vulnerable. That's one thing we don't want.
That's true too. And we're not always comfortable becoming vulnerable, so. And there's always a risk, right? When you lower your guard, that's when you can get hurt. But well, it looks like we've reached a limit.
Thank you, Father.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for hosting me and having me here.
And again, thank you. Father Maximus will be continuing tomorrow. He'll be going to the Holy Archangel's Monastery, and we'll be there for a little while, and then we'll be the retreat master, if that's the right term.
I'm not calling it that, but
Yeah.
are you familiar with the big event in San Antonio this week?
So this, we have all the Archdiocesan Presbyters Council, so all Archbishop will be the photos of the Archbishop for the entire country. Metropolitan Isaiah, our own Metropolitan Bishop that oversees us from Denver, and all clergy from all over the country in our archdiocese are descending upon San Antonio this week. And Father Maximus is the retreat.
One of the keynote speaker. They meet every other year in some big hotel somewhere. And they usually have two speakers. They have a kind of a theologically oriented speaker, and they have like a businessman, or the last time I spoke they had a man who lost like 300 pounds. He was talking about weight loss, obviously. But this year, that's his thing, you know. This year, the kind of the yeah, you got a lot to worry about. This year, the non-theology guy is this executive from like Chick-fil-A, who they drag out to a lot of these things. So I wonder if the hope is that he won't underwrite the chicken dinner, or no, so they try to have they have something spiritual and something maybe more practical, or I don't know.
That's interesting. So
Contemporary.
I remember you, but I didn't remember the Chick-fil-A person, but okay. And then and then it's also an opportunity for us to be together with Archbishop Okiloporos for the first time. For many of us, it'll be our first opportunity to really have a one-on-one experience with him, and so I'm sure the meetings will also kind of morph into a different and a new way because of the new Archbishop.
They say he's going to take over.
I have a feeling he's going to have an audience, so I'm sure he's going to speak a lot more.
I would think so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then will you have time to come back here on Sunday?
No. Yeah. So that begins on Monday.
Oh.
So Father Maximus will be at the Holy Archangel's Monastery going into the weekend, and then I think you'll be there probably on Sunday.
There's already some clergy there,
Yes, they're having their meeting.
and I'll probably end up getting a ride with them on Monday morning,
Probably.
or not Sunday night, but Monday morning.
So Monday morning we're going to have a divine liturgy here for the protection of Theotokos, Greek calendar, and so the protection is celebrated on the 28th of October in reflection of what happened historically in Greece with Orsi Day, and that the Mother of God had appeared and had shown herself to be a protector. And so the calendar in the Church of Greece moved it from the 1st of October to the 28th of October. We currently vote, so we celebrated on the 1st and the 28th to satisfy all people. So we're kind of... And then after that we'll be going over. I'll have a friend of mine actually here, Father Billy Tragus from California, is flying into Austin, and he'll be joining me on Monday morning, and then we'll be going on Monday afternoon.
What time do things start on Monday?
People start arriving at 2 p.m.
Oh, so it's later in the day.
Yeah.
So you're giving any talk at other angels, or just...
No, I'm just going there to rest a little bit. Pilgrimage. Oh.
We want to meet once a month. We want to offer an opportunity for all of us to fellowship. I'm so grateful that Father Maximus could be here. We'll be continuing to stay in touch via email. As Alan Wynn said, if you have not yet